Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Mayhem and Masterplans. We're running episode number 11 now, I think. So we crushed number 10. We're in the 2-digit space. We're more successful than nearly 70% of all podcasts out there that made it past episode 10. And how do you guys feel about that? Hello, Andreas. Hello, Simon.
Simon, you go first.
Feeling very good about it. So how successful we are.
Yeah, me too. I feel very, very accomplished, surprised too, because I didn't actually look at those numbers before. So you just kind of hit me with this hammer. So yeah, amazing. Feels amazing.
Amazing. Andreas went to get a haircut. So
yes.
So
it was very, very necessary.
Well, did you ever have long hair? Since you're big into heavy metal, right? Did you ever have long hair?
Not long hair. I've had longish hair, long enough that it was annoying me, and that it had to be cut off and shaved off at some point. So for a while, I actually had a haircut like yours, Max.
Really?
Yeah. yes.
Wow.
So
with your hairline,
well, not with the hairline, but but that was in my late teens, early 20s, something like that. But yes, otherwise, I mean, I had kind of longish hair, but
like, never
long.
Maybe it's your shirt and your haircut, because So I also mentioned it before you joined, Max, that Andreas has a new haircut, but maybe
glasses, new haircut, new shirt.
You look very
finally you're looking at me. Finally you see me. That's what it is.
We see
you never look at me. Oh my God.
Oh, well, you have to put in a little bit of effort, I would say, then,
Now I know what's needed.
Yeah, well, that's how it is. That's the attention economy that we live in. But yeah. Otherwise, we've all been traveling quite a bit, and so we've been to a few events. The AI Navigator happening in Germany, the Voices from Staff Base. Andreas, you've been traveling from Germany back to the US, and then you've been traveling within the US. So yeah, everybody's is keeping busy, and another thing, we're recording this episode mid-June, so we're close to the halfway mark of 2025 already. So
that's crazy.
That's
absolutely crazy if you think about it.
It is, but then again, it kind of like, in my opinion, 2025 took off really, really slow, and then it kind of started speeding up. Well, if you think about, like, we had an election and all that kind of stuff, you had not an election, but a new president in the US coming into office, that was beginning of the year. You had a new
that was January 20th. So I can tell you that from a US perspective, the first 2.5 weeks were maybe slow. And then the new administration came in, and then nothing was slow anymore.
Then it was just wild. But then you had a new chancellor coming in Germany. So if you just think about what happened in January, that seems already very, very far away everything that happened. So, but regardless of that.
Yeah, and let's see what the next 6 months will bring, right? So that's also the first 6 months were quite eventful.
Right. Yeah.
Around the world. Yeah, let's see what the next 6 months will bring.
Besides that, interestingly enough, I think one thing that that has me always wondering, because I usually complain that we everything could go faster. Starting a company, everything could go faster. But if you think about it, we started a company in 2021 that was kind of like we're testing out the product and everything. So really, the go-to market or launching in the market is 2022. So it's now getting we're closing off year number 3. And so then you always feel like it's too slow. Everything is happening too slow. But then if you look at if you study business and you look at a life cycle of a company, it is so strange that you're going through that exact cycle where you go through the valley of death in the first 3 years. You're turning profitable, you're kind of getting traction, like everything that everybody tells you, and you kind of feel like, no, for us it might be different. Or then you look at some other companies that are highly funded, they still going through the same kind of cycle. And to that point, I think 2025 has been a very interesting year because it's like it has been quite successful. It has, we've made another huge step into kind of like growing up. I said last year we kind of upgraded from this like
From
bumpy
suffering to
like
real life.
yeah, and also from like those bumpy little like what do you call those little cars that you use like in the downhill races where you kind of like that you built on your own, like the box car,
Go-karts.
go-kart,
yeah.
box car, like the box car thing, like upgraded to a go-kart where they had a motor and you didn't have to hold the sides on anymore. And now it kind of feels like we're upgrading to like a Nissan Miata or something, like to a small kind of like functioning car. So,
dear clients, if you're listening to this, we have never looked at ourselves as a go-kart or a bumpy, somewhat stitched together ride. We've always strived to, provide you with something reliable, like a proper automobile.
Yeah, he's not. He's talking
yes,
about the
all
company,
joking
not about
aside,
the product, right?
No, I know. All joking aside, I think you're right. I think realistically, and it truly doesn't matter if a company is well funded, VC funded or otherwise, or kind of bootstrapped. It does take 2 to 3 years to get traction, to get realistic about your products, your markets, to have a rapport with clients and potential clients. And, let's not forget that we're in a B2B market, which also means that the clients that we're dealing with and that we're approaching, those are large organizations. Some of them decades old, some of them more than 100 years old. And these organizations, they are run by people who want consistency and who want reliability in their vendors. And so they look at us and they look at our product and they come to the conclusion that they like the product and that they like us who we're interacting with, but they still want to see track record. They still want to see that, we're in it for the long run and that we are serious about running a business and not just building a company, which is two very different things.
Yeah.
And so I think we do see this. I think you're right, Max. We do see this year in the responses from some of the bigger brands that, we approach or reapproach in some instances, and their willingness to not just engage, but really move forward quickly and swiftly and with inked contracts. So I'm really quite happy with how that has developed.
And
I agree.
that's maybe the upside of like, and Scott Galloway said it in one of his podcasts, like if you want to really like build a long-term successful business, move into the spaces that are like special interest or niche, and move into the spaces that seem a bit boring, that nobody wants to go into, because it's not like you're not making quick bucks, but you making sustainable, you're building a sustainable business, you're building sustainable revenue, and that might not go in 3 years, but that might run over 10 years, but then it might also run for another 40, 50 years, and not just, that hype bubble of like 3 years, and then hopefully you do a fire sale or an exit quickly enough before, everything goes to shit. But yeah, so I'm quite happy about that, and especially like in times and in an environment that is maybe not super friendly to like coming up with new solutions in a hesitant market space, and that kind of stuff. So that always, like, it's a double proof of like, okay, we're building something sustainable, valuable to organization, because they're buying even in times of when there's when budgets are being cut, but they're still buying because they see.
Yeah.
And even
They see
maybe
the value,
that, and maybe in those times where it's more important to keep consistent communications going, seeing this as a valuable solution is also something that I feel like, oh, okay, so it took this for a lot of people to understand, hey, this really, really adds value, and it moves from, we early on talked about, is it a nice to have or a must have, and now it moves more into like, oh, this is definitely a must have because we need to set up a good conversation.
Definitely,
That's actually an interesting aspect. So, some of the listeners might know, you guys, of course, know that I also run a different company, a consulting firm. And with that business, we're seeing certainly different dynamics in the market at the moment. So, there were a number of good conversations leading up, into January, February. Then everybody held off, or not everybody, but especially larger companies and corporations held off to see what the Trump administration would be doing. Then came April and the big shock of the announced tariffs, at which point, frankly, most of these conversations were, either actively put on hold, as in you get a phone call, people saying, we're going to take a break from this, or some of our potential clients also just simply ghosted us. Not great, but that. On the other hand, what you're saying is, so the stuff that we do, targets, yes, startups and companies, traditional companies, but also in a very specific way, we deal with family-run businesses for succession conversations. So specifically, small and medium enterprises who are run by, I don't know, the first or second generation of family, and who have people in their family who could take over the business, are often not that motivated to take over the business and just keep it running. And so in order to facilitate these conversations, we sometimes come in with category design, category thinking, conversation starters or guidance to help these, frankly, families, because these are internal family conversations at this stage very often, kind of think differently about the opportunities that there might be with the existing business, that the individual, the younger generation might have in order to kind of leave their own mark on the business, or to combine their other ideas with what that business is doing. And those conversations, because they are kind of independent of these very loud market conversations, they are continuing steady. In fact, they might even be ramping up a little bit. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Very, very, very true. So, well, always interesting times. But after a little bit of chit chat at the beginning, Simon, you brought a topic. And what is that topic?
Right. What are we talking about?
Since Max and I had a call today about how the business is going, I thought, and we also discussed here and there the topics I brought today, the podcast business. So I had that on my mind earlier this year because a headline got my attention on TechCrunch, and the headline was A16Z acqui-hires VC tech podcaster Eric Torenberg. Never heard about Eric Torenberg, but he has a turpentine. I think it's spelled, it's Turpentine podcast, and it's a typical VC podcast, right? So I think he has guests there from the VC scene.
You gotta speak into the microphone.
Hello.
The basics of podcasting.
Yes. And Yeah, so and then there's the 20-minute VC, Harry Stebbings. It's a podcaster who created, or the narrative is a podcaster turned into a VC because he learned a lot from his VC guests in the podcast, and then he started a VC from the podcast. Yeah,
By the
and
way,
then
we're producing a podcast called How to Invest with Shirin Maroun. It's a German podcast, and her
role model is
her role model
20-minute VC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's really I think phenomenal how the narrative is so that you be first a podcaster and then you turn into something really different role, which needs a lot of domain experience, a lot of a lot of education. But as I think that Harry Stebbings is I don't think he's a college dropout, but he definitely has not an study finance or something like that, right? So that's I think it's really cool how to see how much you can, or how the people see these podcasts, or especially podcast hosts, right? So if you host a podcast, you
But isn't that
almost
exactly what we always talk about in establishing thought leadership and
yeah.
rapport with your
And that's the
audience?
proof, right? That's the proof.
That's 100% the proof. I think there's a few things, like you can go back to people like Joe Rogan, who now leads political conversation or or kind of like shapes opinions on mainstream topics, being like a former jiu-jitsu fighter, like turned TV host, turned into something else. And that is kind of like a thing. Then you have those people you talked about in the VC space. I think there's Gary Vaynerchuk, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
So he turned this into a business. Tim Robbins, Tim Ferriss. No, Tony Robbins and Tim Ferriss, I think they started off as podcasters.
But Tim Ferriss
Tim
was
Robbins
more
also
author,
did
right?
great work.
Tim Robbins, right? Yeah. So those people, and then there's a German example from Philipp Westermeier, or off Philipp Westermeier, OMR, Online Marketing Rockstars, which kind of started off a tiny conference, but the main thing was the podcast, and I think it still is. So he built a whole business around a podcast that he runs. I think that is very very much true. And then there's another German example, I think, where a podcaster turned into like a media personality, is Hotel Matze. Where kind of like Hotel Matze is doing interview podcasting, and this is what we tell our customers.
I have one question. Would you find some kind of examples with influencers, where influencers were
but these are influencers. That's what I was just about to say.
I mean the classical Instagram.
There is no classical. That's the thing. There is no classic influencer, right? Some influencers,
the Instagram
catch
influencer.
you on visual networks like Instagram, and they tend to look pretty, and do interesting stuff. And then some influencers you find, just because their voice is great, and then at some point you might see a photo of them or not. But ultimately it comes down to the conversations and the people that they have these conversations with. Other influencers, I don't know, might just be, folks who have crazy, funny ideas. And if you really think about it, stuff like Hot Ones or Hot Takes or whatever it's called, is definitely just a couple of crazy kids deciding that you now need to eat the hottest fucking wings that somebody can.
Hot Ones is the show that I watched from season 1 on. And
yes, exactly.
And so big. They've gotten so
exactly.
big.
They got so big because it was engaging. And it doesn't matter what it is. If you're, I don't know, showing your sporty side on Instagram, or if it is you talking more or less smartly about topics that other people are interested in, or if you're forcing other people to eat hot wings, whatever it is that people find entertaining and engaging, and that ultimately is as much about you as it is about the other guests that you might invite. So in some
but-
instances, you'll find amazing episodes, amazing interviews where the interviewer is forgettable.
But I think what Simon question was is more or less like what we consider an influencer, like those like Instagram faces, and then you want to know who turned into a podcaster and kind of like change like their
no, if they turn their Instagram fame into a business, right? I think it's much harder if you are
I think there's a ton of those. There's a ton of them.
Really?
Yeah. Like if you consider they either do co-creation, and then think about the guys from Oase in Germany, like the fastest growing fitness brand in Germany. They were kind of like influencers, had a certain reach.
Before they started always.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have a ton of those. There's a ton of those.
Yeah,
you
but
might not know those products. Like think back, like the biggest German influencer, Dagi B, did their own product line. There's a ton of
yeah,
those
that's
people.
sure. All the collaborations and all the stuff that's for sure.
Pamela Reif now has this like, and she's a global superstar now. Coming from Germany, she's big in Asia. She has like a fitness program. She has like a nutrition company. I think there's a ton of
so here's
those.
the question though, other than nutrition companies, fitness programs,
Yeah.
videos or something else, and get slim fast supplements, is there anything actually new in that space? Does anybody ever come up with something new, or is it just a new face selling me
Crypto.
ultimately the same kind of product
Crypto,
again?
Dogecoin.
Oh God.
Dogecoin.
I think
yes.
there's a bunch of finance people that built like
Yeah.
finance businesses around. Like I think they target industries that are easy to access, where it's like easy to kind of like nutrition has like high margin products is a big topic, like supplements and that kind of stuff. That's why everybody moves into that space. And then one of the big so I think like when you look at Instagram, one of the biggest categories on Instagram is beauty and fitness and fashion. I think there's a ton of fashion brands that were created. There's a ton of fitness, like supplement stuff, and there's a bunch of beauty products that came out of Instagram because those were the main categories. So the biggest influencers, and they kind of realized that they can build a business around that, right? I think even if you look at Mr. Beast, he built an entire business out of what he was doing, right? On YouTube.
Yeah, but Mr. Beast is YouTube, right? So
yeah, but it's another
Instagram.
channel to become an influencer, right? And so to them, like the channel aren't, there's a ton of that. I think so. I think you go by what categories work the best and what are the biggest categories, and if you're the biggest on there, you probably build a business around what you expect will be big. So I think that's why, from a podcast perspective, I think you have people that go into, again, I think finance is a big thing. Personal development is a big thing that people do, like the 4-hour work week, and that, where you kind of like do this, the self-optimization stuff, that is discussed. So I think that's why a lot of people come out of that space. From the podcast industry, I think those are because it's one of the biggest topics in podcasting. I think another one is sports, because sports podcasts are a big thing, and then you see, what is it, Barstool, whatever they're called.
Barstool Media, Barstool Sports.
So they gotten big, and there's a ton of that, but yeah.
So what would you prefer, being an Instagram influencer with a certain amount of followers, or a podcaster in the niche, or a niche influencer on Instagram?
Andreas?
Definitely podcaster. I don't need to. The thing is, I'm fine with people following my ideas or guidance, which is what I already do and sell, and that's already my life. But I'm not an influencer trying to get your attention. And I'm certainly, as an influencer, I would have to get haircuts much more often than I do. So no way.
And to me, it's the same thing. And there's two aspects to that. I think it's very, very difficult to create something that's visually appealing. Like in social media, you have an attention span of close to 1 second to grab somebody's attention. So you need to really meticulously build a strategy on how often do you post, and so to create a 1 minute or 30-second video to really grab somebody's attention, you spend a ton of time to create that, and it's
Mhm.
very, very hard to do that on point. And it takes a lot of work. And then you have that visual aspect that needs to come into this. So there's limitations on what you can do to grab somebody's attention. But I think, and then there's like with the visual aspect of it, I think a platform, you might grow too old for a certain platform or a certain topic. So
Yeah.
I think you see what you see now, a bunch of like those like Instagrammers, TikTokers, starting their own podcast because it's like a very easy way to create content because you get into conversations. You can build out your personality much
Yeah.
better than you can do that in those like craziness, like memification of a human being that you see now happening, like where you need to be really bold, where you need to be really like provocative in a certain way to really grab attention in this like one doom scrolling. So you need to be like really loud and crazy. So and we talked about that with like CEOs and companies. So that is also
Yeah.
where you see those like big name where you see those CEOs now being on those platforms, they become like a meme of what they actually are. And it, if the trend moves on, you might be stuck in that space. So you might not build your business as fast, and you might not be as like flashy and shiny with a podcast, but you can definitely again do this very sustainably for like we can do this podcast when we're 70 years old. Like being on TikTok was 70 years old and you haven't found your niche, like that can be really cringe. But a podcast, you can always do it. And I think that's and you can really build a story and like to me it's all about sustainability in what you do, and I think that's why a
Yeah.
podcast is so valuable. And then the other component is podcasting or something, and James Critland from Pod you said that in an episode that we recorded for a new podcast coming out called Amplify. You should check it out next week. um where he said like shows are shows, but podcasts, what are podcasts? We do this discussion, but it's a odd like it's something for the ears when the eyes are busy. That's what he said. And I always say like it's an audio first product. So it should work. And that's why podcasts are so great. And they leave that certain space for you to be creative. And that's why I think it's very, very interesting as a medium to work on.
I think podcast also has this wonderful bandwidth of different things, right? You can have the highly produced ones. You have longer and shorter options, even within the same podcast. Even taking our own as an example, it can vary. Sometimes we have very lighthearted conversations, not super substantial, admittedly, and relatively short. Yeah, I know,
What?
and shocking. And then at other times, we kind of go really deep into a topic. I remember a bunch of years ago when podcasting really just started coming up. I very often listened to a podcast called Roderick on the Line. It was essentially a phone conversation between two friends, Merlin Mann and John Roderick. One of them lives in San Francisco, the other one in Seattle. I think they're still doing it on occasion. And these guys, just caught up with one another and then recorded it. And then at some point they decided that, you know, maybe there are a couple of things that they want to talk about without the microphone running or the tape running. But other than that, they could just, have their weekly catch-up calls with one another and put it on the internet. And it was fun. It was really interesting. And in a way, you got to know these two characters in a very intimate, personal level, because they didn't try to sell you anything. They didn't have a business to promote. They didn't have, I mean, sure, they had activities and they would sometimes talk about them. But it was really just two friends hanging out, if you will, and letting other people listen in, which is actually very, very similar in a way to the early days of Twitter, when certain people, certain kind of groups of interested people would kind of congregate there, have their conversations, and other people could listen in and chime in, or read along.
You remember Clubhouse?
I do. But Clubhouse came a lot later.
Yeah, I know, but wasn't that kind of like the idea of intimate conversations, and you can drop in and...
Yes, I think it was, but it came at a time when, well, first of all, it was VC funded, which meant they wanted to see hockey stick growth, and so they ultimately growth hacked it.
I think
they killed it.
Toxic investment, the other thing is, killed it.
Yeah. But the other thing is also that it came at a time when a lot of people were desperately seeking new ways of getting attention and doing something. And so like that
the LinkedIn
also
bubble,
killed it.
The LinkedIn bubble took over and destroyed it too. So there was like the attention-seeking LinkedIn bubble, which we can talk about in
another episode.
In another episode about like where LinkedIn might has gone wrong and why it might be time for a new platform or a new need
business
for
platform.
I hear there's this German platform that could really scale globally. Xing? Sorry, no. Xing people.
But you coming. There's another thing to the podcast industry that there's today there was a bunch of stuff going on, but
I haven't heard about it's Fireside Chat, right?
Campfire. But that's not the one that I wanted to talk about. But like they built the communities around podcasts. It's Campfire. It's a German company. I think could be interesting to see. But what is interesting to our conversation, Simon, about today about the podcast industry, where globally ad revenue in podcasting is growing while it's taken a heavy hit in Germany. And one thing is, I think the industry is poorly managed in Germany. I think with radio being still really strong and TV being really strong, since we're a very old kind of like society, podcasting is struggling with that. And then another thing that came into my head that we might see is whenever an industry is growing, there's always something that is built in Germany that is too small for a global market because it's just German speaking, and then it's going to be run over and bulldozed by an English speaking, kind of like we've seen that on LinkedIn, we've seen that on Facebook, and maybe the podcast industry, because now a lot of people listen to you like English speaking podcasts. So if you listen to a business podcast, you can listen to a few German ones, but then in general, you kind of tend to listen to a lot of US ones like Pivot or something like that. So, you're already fighting against a $30 million funded Pivot with like Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway versus the German equivalent to that.
Yes, but most of these German efforts also just don't think big enough. They think in terms of, just their German language region, if that, right?
Yeah.
So, if they do think about GLR or Dach, as you call it, then already they're kind of stretching beyond.
Isn't it GSA?
No, it's German language region, GLR.
A lot of people call it GSA, like Germany, Switzerland, Austria.
Yeah, but then you're missing the German speakers in northern Italy, for example, or elsewhere.
Or Belgium.
So, anyway,
really,
all 11 of them.
German speaking community in Belgium.
Point being that
100 million, 100 million people you can reach.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you think about that way, and if you want to focus on that global niche, great. There's nothing wrong with that. But then don't be surprised that there's somebody else, who might be thinking a little bigger.
So, but how are you going to tackle that? If you want to do it, because there's a need for I guess a German speaking product. But then do you think they approach it with the mindset of not even thinking this could be the biggest podcast in Germany, or I'm trying to build what I still wonder. You can build a podcast in Germany that interviews like with the right amount of money or whatever, like the right amount, like the right setting, build a podcast that interviews all all major CEOs, all major German CEOs.
Okay.
And you could have that, and people
Sure.
will listen to it, and it could be a big thing. And like one of the efforts that I liked, like building a podcast, was Ronsheimer in Germany, for example, that now is the biggest
Yeah.
news or journalistic podcast, which, you know, and I talked to the people from Axel Springer, and they said it took them nearly 3 years to develop that format and get them
Of
to
course.
sign off on it.
Yeah, yeah, and at the same time, you also need to have you have to realize that those guests, CEOs, or whoever you're targeting to have on your podcast, they also need to feel comfortable and safe and challenged and interested in being there, right? And so, if you have an interviewer or a podcast host who is, who has a lot of reach, then some people might come on, I don't know, around election time when they want to reach a bunch of people. But if it is really about having substantial and good conversations and building, your podcast as, for example, the brand where you find conversations with all the big German CEOs, then you need to have somebody who is thoughtful and smart and adaptable to a conversation, who can prepare for a conversation, but then also pivot along the way and along the conversation. Frankly, Florian is doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
With
Mission
our own
Control.
podcast,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
Mission
yeah.
Control. When you when you listen to those conversations, they are well researched ahead of time. They are thoughtful along the way, and you can absolutely, put anybody in that format. Is if you are the PR person of a major corporation, you need to think about that. How will my CEO look when they sit in front of that
And one of
microphone
the biggest compliments that he
or
always tells me
sound?
that he gets is like questions that make you think. So he asks
Yes.
questions that make you think. So it's like he's a very good
Mhm.
conversationalist with you. So and brings you to a
Exactly.
point where you feel like that was fun being here. That was fun. It
Yes.
gave me
Exactly.
something of being here. And I think there's
Exactly.
there's a ton of potential in that. So I think while we're giving out like flowers and hooray, I think would help us to that we have a substantial business outside of Germany in the US or North America. Let's
Mhm.
put it that way, is because from early on you said like don't think so small and don't think in that like we're targeting the German market and then we grow from there. Like
Mhm.
that automatically happens if you because you're
Yeah.
in that market anyway. And I think
Yeah.
it's a I think to like it if you have a business that's not bound to legal restrictions or production facilities or something like that. If you're building software, stop
Mhm.
thinking about like let me corner my German market. Think about it
Yeah.
globally, and I think that really helped us. That you kind of push for like don't think so small. And I think with that approach, that lets you think on about your product and your company in a very different way because to a certain extent you see certain competitors in the market not even as competitors anymore because you're like well they doing this for this market. I'm thinking on a different level, so you're not getting into the struggle of making yourself small because you will have that struggle anyway, and there's so much that you kind of need to hype yourself up all the time, and by
Mhm.
thinking globally about what you do, that gives you that
Mhm.
certain kind of like I don't know
It also
craziness in
Yeah.
thinking too big, but it helps. I think it helps.
It also helps. It also helps, frankly, in streamlining your product because
Yeah,
you think in terms of features or functionality that will work for a large amount of people, not just for a specific
yeah,
area of the world. And yeah, that might sometimes leave a niche for some other person to come along, but that's okay. In typical category thinking, it's okay if you have others compete for the remaining 20%, if you own 80% of the market. Totally fine.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the bouquet of flowers.
So Simon, what would you rather
Thank
be?
you.
Do you want to be an Instagram fame guy, or or you rather do a podcast, or
Yeah, so
Fitness influencer?
fitness influencer, no. But the thing is, so what's really attractive on being an Instagram influencer? Because in my point of view, or what I have heard, is it's comparable easy to earn money from it, right? Compared to other platforms. So, but
I think TikTok is the place where you want to earn money now.
no, yeah. But it's definitely harder to earn money with a podcast, right? Than being an influencer on Instagram. But I would go with being a podcaster as well, because I think growing out of a podcast into something business related, or building a business out of a podcast, I think it's the podcast is more flexible and gives you more opportunities, right? And you can brand yourself as a domain expert, and you can show yourself better as a domain expert, or as
and
an
you
expert
get
in
really,
something.
I think with like having a 45-minute conversation or something like that, you really build expertise in that field. So it's not just that
Also,
I give you a quote or a 30-second kind of like insight into like, hey, this is like what I learned in what blah blah blah, that kind of garbage. But you know, so I think
That's
starting a podcast and then from that building an online presence, I think that could help. Thinking it that way, like long form and then turning it into short form. So the kind of things that we tell our customers all the time is something that you can really take from it, and then by having all those conversations, you really build your expertise, and I think you build relationships, and you see that as well if you go into the Voices conference and you had those people on the podcast. Like, it's a very, very different thing when you approach them in person, and they're like, oh yeah, we had this great conversation. So you already are a very, very different level of
I was just going to say, I think it's something that so for those of you who don't know, I used to be a journalist, and one of the best things about being a reporter and being a journalist is that you get to have conversations with people. You get to ask them questions. You get to sit down or follow along or tag along and just be there and learn. And you can soak up a bunch of things. And I think the same is true for good conversations, recorded or not, which is you have a chance to listen. You have a chance to learn. You have a chance just for yourself, right? You have a few questions for the CEO or that influencer, for that matter, or that artist, and you get to listen to their take on it. You get to listen to their way of thinking about certain things. You get to interrogate them. You get to ask a follow-up question if you need to or if you want to.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege to have that time with people, frankly. And as long as you don't abuse it and use it well and do it well, it's a fantastic, exciting way of spending your time, but also their time, because they like to have conversations too. They learn something new as well. And be it just something new about themselves by answering one of your questions. I think conversations are really underrated these days. And, in real life or not, or with a microphone or not, I think there's a lot to be said about that. And a 30-second soundbite that I deliver after practicing it 3 times so that I can squeeze all the points I want to make into 59 seconds so I can slap my logo at the end of it and then post it as a reel on Instagram. I don't know, guys. It has its place. It has its place, but
100%. But I think we need to come back to a world where we kind of have an alternative to those short form, like wild noise, yelling, screaming at you kind of like scenarios where, you know, and we talked about it again as well. There's a new podcast that came out, a German podcast about Peter Thiel, the Peter Thiel story, and how he
yes. That has been making its rounds. I haven't listened to it yet, but
yeah, me neither.
It's still on my list.
But the idea of think about, so we had Wirecard in Germany. That was a big podcast. When you think about what journalism can do, if you think about stop writing like a 1 or 2 page article for The Economist or the Spiegel or whatever, New York Times, but think about turning it into a 6-part podcast where you can really build out a story as a journalist. That shouldn't that be the goal? Shouldn't that be the goal to tell an really, really interesting story? And there's a few of them. Like there's a TV, like go back and if you're in that space, watch the Netflix documentary on like Tiger King or the Aaron Hernandez story. And it's called Gladiator. It's Wondery and the Chicago Globe or something like that. I don't know, or New York Times or something like that. Came up with a podcast called Gladiator. It's the story about Aaron Hernandez. And then there was a movie. It's called Joe versus Carol that came out prior to the Tiger King as a podcast series. And listen to that. So, and then you see like those are great stories. They're told great, but they left that room for interpretation, for building your own like story behind it. And I think like that's what journalists can really exploit. And you know, not just journalists, but companies, individuals. And so my like coming out of that conversation with James is like, think about audio first and then everything else, you know, comes second to that. And I think you can, you know, build great products around that. And to close off the episode, because being mindful of our listeners' ears, what song are we going to close off with today?
What is my last?
Manila Palm from Para for Kuva. It's a German DJ, but that's coincidence. It's which playlist is it? It's a. Let me check. Which playlist is it?
It's not that important.
It's a fun playlist. Yeah.
I'd have to go back. I feel I've listened to this one before on another podcast. This one today is Not Nothing by Dark Tranquillity.
All right. And because I saw in a video by another podcast host that we produce, it's called How to Marketing. So Philip is in Cannes right now. Everybody's in Cannes right now. And he was at a Snapchat party with 50 Cent, and Fitty was playing a few songs. So I went back and listened to it in the club, which is also the album that I listened to when I was in the States back in 2003, 2004. That was my first introduction to hip hop, where I thought like it's not possible as a guy coming out of rock music listening to hip hop, but that was kind of like it was different in listening to rock and hip hop. And that was the album that changed everything for me. And In the Club, if you go back today, it stands the test of time. Still is a great song. It's a fun song. And 50 is still a fun guy. And I love his story. I like his personality. I like that story where he came from and what he turned into and the businesses he built. And I think I really love what he's done, and then moved away from music because it's like that's not me anymore. It's just I don't perform well anymore, so I play the hits now and people still love it, but generally I do like 5 TV shows and drinks and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what I listen to.
All right.
Cool. Then
Very much.
Everyone, thanks for listening. It's been fun talking
bye
with you.
bye.